So you're bringing our awareness to, oh, everybody's at a different stage in that grief process, moving toward, but still moving towards this question of like, what do we do? What is this moment asking of us? And we all have a small part to play. And that's a very difficult discernment of like, what is my small part to play?
Welcome to the Wicked Truth Podcast, Third Things First, your home for conversations with artists and peace builders, helping us imagine life after conflict. This week, we're continuing to talk with Gena St. David about the brain's role in building peace. When trust has been broken, how can we weather our brain's first reactions so we can imagine a more hopeful future for ourselves and our planet? Jenna has some wonderful thoughts to share with us this week. Thanks for tuning in. And you know, there are real risks to being an activist and to taking action, and some of us are in a better position to take risks than others, emotionally, spiritually, financially, politically. And I just I just think this is not a one size fits all. Fits
Yeah.
well, what is? I mean,
Yeah.
we need to cultivate that compassion for ourselves and for others. And especially right now, I'm recognizing you're watching the media loves tracking approval ratings and who's, who was a supporter of Trump and now they're no longer, and approval ratings are going down. And I think that it's especially, um, risky time, I guess, for us as a nation is how are we gonna treat one another when, um, if someone comes up to you and says, it feels like, "Oh, I think I'm changing my mind. I've made a mistake." Um, whichever side that person is coming from, how do you not say, "I told you so," or how do you not gloat, or how do you make space for people to change their minds? I don't think we've created that space right now. We're so it's you're with me or against me. And there's no that third thing, the space that a third thing can make to to recognize something that you share, the humanity you share, and the um, concerns that you share. It may have brought you to a different conclusion,
Right.
um, but how do we break out of this rivalrous space that we're in?
Yep. Well,
I know
that's
that's
one
a
of
good question, Jenna.
it's one of the reasons why I so appreciate the way you're framing the question is like, what are those third things that we can come around together that are those bridges? And so like I will say I did go to the women's march that day. And once I was there, I was obviously really glad that I did. And I have continued to get more and more involved because I think I am in that privileged season. So I am one of
Mm,
those individuals who is just, I'm midlife, mid-career, middle class, my kids are grown, I'm not vulnerable immigration wise. And so I recognize like I am in a position to go to the protests and learn how, but I've had to learn, Suzanne. So so exactly that question is like, how do we enter into what feels like a fight, and we how do we enter into it non-violently with a different vision, like King's vision of beloved community as the aftermath of a non-violent conflict where enemies are future friends, and there is a um a ground of respect and dignity, mutual dignity, so that somebody can change their mind or we can join forces around what we can agree on together. And like for instance, you know, my Substack is called the Nonviolence Lab because I'm really running a lot of experiments in my own life and observing people who are running experiments in nonviolence. And in particular, I've been drawn to the creativity of the animal welfare movement because, they are they're staging nonviolent direct action, sometimes to go in and rescue animals in ways that require breaking the law and requires nonviolent civil disobedience, and then receiving those outcomes of either arrest, you know, charges, or like most recently, I was at a nonviolent direct action where the police were really violent back to the protesters. And that was the first time that I had experienced that physically firsthand, being tear gassed, pepper sprayed,
Yeah.
um, and Um, and so when the level of conflict has ratcheted up that high, what is the third thing that can invite um a coming together around a shared value? If and animals like this particular protest was around the lives of beagles who are used in medical testing. If beagles are the most trusted, like, I mean, they're used for medical testing because they're so trusting and loyal, and they will they can, when they're abused and tortured, the next day they will still be licking that person's face, and so that's why they're used. It's heartbreaking, and if but I just think of a beagle as being like this third thing that
Yeah.
everybody, most people have this very warm
Mm.
feeling of oxytocin of like, yeah, this is a life that is worth preserving, protecting, and rescuing. And so the question though is like the law enforcement folks that we encountered, um, that was like in their blind spot. It was like outside of their awareness. So I'm really thinking about this quite a bit. Like, how does nonviolent resistance, how does a nonviolent movement truly extend a hand of friendship to the opposition, especially when the opposition is enforcing the status quo through violence? What does that look like? And I don't have the solution, but I am
Yeah.
in community with some people who are experimenting some really creative ways to do that in our current time.
Oh, wow. I'm looking forward to what you discover together, because I think in a way, just being nonviolent itself is a way that shows respect and
Mhm.
potential that we can be in relationship. Because 'cause I'm not gonna harm you, even though I disagree with you. Um, and there's something about the trust that the animals put in us. I think there's something about that that triggers a response, like, if we feel that someone trusts us, but and mostly children and animals just do it. And no matter what you do to them, they come back in trust. And it for me personally, it brings out my desire to live up to that trust, and, maybe if we could even, in spite of our disagreements, just trust one another a little more. But that gets us back to, what are there, um ways in which we can I know you talk in your book about ways that we can learn to tolerate stress a little more, like when we're because those situations where an animal is being abused feel quite urgent. It's not like we can sit around and wait for a solution. So that urgency and stress is so real. I mean, it's true. It's an accurate assessment. So how do we stay in a space of nonviolence in a way where our best parts of our brains are functioning?
Yeah. Well, I think you bringing up that urgency is one of the right variables for us to place our attention on because, I've come to learn that things are often as serious as they seem, but they're rarely as urgent as they seem. Meaning it's rare that we can't take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and often that's all it takes.
Mm.
to help bring on that activate the upper part of our brain or help each other do that. Um, so it actually doesn't take as long as we think it will, but the urgency will make our body feel as if we have to react right now within seconds. And that is often how violent patterns are perpetuated is it happens in a matter of seconds. It's not calculated and thought through and then someone decides. There is that at the higher level of systems, but it
Yeah.
all on the micro level, it happens in seconds. And so just practicing changing our relationship with time and recognizing that the situation can be very dire and serious, but I can take 5 minutes to ground myself before I decide how to react often makes all the difference. And so meditation, we all know, is really helpful with that. I mean, meditation or contemplative prayer, any form of contemplation that requires slowing down the breath and sitting for like 1 minute longer than we want to
Mm.
can be a really helpful practice.
Yeah.
But I think that we cannot overestimate the power of physical conditioning. It is a lot like going to the gym and building the muscle. Our nervous system is a lot like a muscle. And so, like, for instance, when I've been doing, this nonviolent direct action with these animal welfare groups, we simulate over and over again it is directly out of the civil rights movement. And it's the way that the Nashville and Greensboro students who prepared themselves for the lunch counter sit-ins, and it's sometimes called a hassle line, where the volunteers will line up and act as if we're at a nonviolent protest and we're saying, the chants or holding signs, and then volunteers will hassle us so that we can feel what it feels like and how to hold on to our compassion for that other person, our kindness for the other person, how we can tune into each other and kind of breathe as one so that we can keep our nervous systems from reacting, mirroring back. It's that mirroring, the mimesis part. So we're mirroring something other than the violence that's being given to us. We have to mirror something else because our mirror networks will mirror something. And so if we don't wanna mirror the violence coming at us, we have to mirror something else. So it's either mirroring each other being nonviolent or mirroring, like, a role model that we have in our imagination, like King or Gandhi or Jesus. So we just practice that over and over and over again. And the first few times that I did it, I was tearful, I was shaking,
Mhm.
just, like, being there on the receiving end of harassment that can feel violent. And then over time, I got stronger and more confident and like just learn to breathe through it. And so I think it takes just physical
Right.
conditioning.
Sure. Because the threat feels, well, it's real. I mean, someone's yelling at you or pushing you or threatening you with tear gas or whatever it is. Those are real threats. And how you stay, that's that, you began by saying how you don't think of yourself as a peacemaker or peace builder because of your admiration for people who can stay in those
Mhm.
very high threat situations, and not lose uh, their commitment, their practices of nonviolence. I think that's why we admire these people like King and Gandhi. And there's everyday people that do this all the time too, in personal and family situations. We're not talking about that micro situations, which we that could be another conversation. But it's very, you know, um, a lot of times when we the critique of staying calm in those situations is that you're a doormat and you're letting yourself be abused or being taken advantage of. Um, and I don't, that the ethic of nonviolence and the ethic of turning the other cheek and not returning evil for evil. Um, that now I'll tap into the theologian part of you, and ask, how do you think about those, invitations to love your enemy, without, um, while also protecting yourself, I guess is how I would phrase it.
Uh, well, a couple thoughts come to mind. So first is that it was James Allison who I first heard say, we were taught to love Jesus said to love our enemy, which means we will have them. And when somebody does mean you harm, it doesn't do anyone any good to pretend that that person is a friend yet. So
Mm,
uh, recognizing when somebody is putting themselves in an enemy position towards you is that is a very loving act to just name reality as it is. And then we can move from that awareness to acceptance and then figure out how to respond. And Walter Wink has a really interesting perspective on the turn the other cheek, and he talks about how culturally, um the the right hand was used for, certain things, and the left hand was used for other things. And when Jesus said, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek, he was actually inviting the person to make it impossible for it to be humiliated. Like the person that was slapping the cheek would have to use the backhand, and in such a way that the person's nose would be in the way, and it would really expose the ridiculousness of what was happening.
mm,
And so, as a way to make the violence visible, and that's what, like, for instance, the most recent nonviolent animal welfare, rescue that I went to, where we were tear gassed and pepper sprayed over and over and over again. And I saw these rescuers who are not professional activists. These were like grandmothers and preschool teachers and college students who just love dogs. And were like, we've tried all the legal routes. Everything's failed for years. The court's not taking action. Law enforcement is not taking action. This industry has so much money and power. The public just has to get involved at that point. It's like a failure of the judicial system. And so, that's often what has given rise to nonviolent mass movements, is like a failure of all the other avenues have failed. And so the public just like responded, and then were met with violence back from law enforcement. And I just saw these courageous, everyday people being super creative with like getting tear gassed, coughing, choking, throwing up, helping each other, pouring water on each other, and then gathering back together, finding everybody, and then going back to chanting, going back to trying to get into reach the dogs over and over and over again. And so, when nervous system started, like hardly nobody panicked. And this was like hundreds and hundreds of people. But when nervous system started to get high, like one group started singing Amazing Grace, and another group of like young people started doing the Macarena. And these like really create, like you speak about joy. And it was like people were holding on to their upper lobe and finding ways to feel connected, feel like, we have choices here. These are the things we have control over. Is we're going to sing,
mm,
we're going to dance, we're going to get tear gassed again, and we're going to help each other and then come back, and we're not leaving, because what we have
mm,
control over is where we put our bodies, and we're going to put our bodies as close to these suffering dogs as possible, and just force a conversation to happen. And the dogs are suffering. They can't stand in front of a microphone and tell us about their injuries. But now human beings who have been tear gassed for them can get behind a microphone and speak about their injuries. And it's the same hand that's doing both both
yeah.
the torture. And so, this is incredibly inspiring to me, and also so tragic that it is necessary.
Yeah.
But, this is history. This is how it's always been like this. It has always required this. at certain moments in history. And so here we are again. That's the acceptance. Here we are again. This is our reality. So each of us is deciding what are we going to do? How are we going to meet this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that because it is admirable and it is, I love the strategies, how people stay focused on each other or do something silly or do something that disrupts the mirroring, as
Yep,
you're saying,
exactly.
and
Right. That's
what
exactly what it was. Yeah.
it's doing. I'm wondering, I want to ask one more question about the arts, because you know, I like to make really grand theories that I never test. So I really appreciate that you're testing your theories. But one of my grand theories is that the less we've spent time, energy, and value, the less value we put in the arts in our education system, the harder it's been for us to be kind to one another. That's just one of my theories. Um, and so I'm wondering, to someone who tests theories, what you would think about the role of the arts in nonviolent practice, in creating conditions where healing and peace are more possible.
Mhm. Well, this is one of the reasons I've been so drawn to your work for years, Suzanne, is because, I'm thinking about a gathering that you made happen several years ago of peace builders from all over the world where, we gathered together um for several days to talk about this, like what is effective? How do we respond nonviolently in hot zones of conflict? And I was surprised when I showed up to that gathering. Well, 2 reasons I was surprised. Number 1, I was surprised to be invited because I'm not a peace builder. I wasn't a peace builder, and I felt really out of place. I was like this academic who's living this very safe life in this room of very admirable people, but I knew you had invited me because of the brain science and that you were, curious about that part
You
of the
are a
conversation.
peace builder. I always was saying that too, and Hoel, our dear friend, would say, "Don't you put a wall up between you and who you think are the real peace builders." Because as you're saying, we're all responsible in some way for how we're contributing or not to a more peaceful world, whatever we
Yeah.
do, right?
Yep.
And I wanted you there because of your presence. You're just a peaceful presence, Jenna. So thank you for being that person.
Well,
But
it
yeah,
was
it was a fun gathering, wasn't it? It was really good. It
it was life-changing, I think, for
yeah.
many of us who were there, Suzanne. So thank you for so one of the second thing that surprised me was that, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this group is doing something different." Because, we go to conferences and we talk about nonviolence. And I even think like some of the folks there had just come from a UN conference about peace building, where a lot of it is like heady. And so if we think about like the left brain versus the right brain, the left brain is trying to pin things down in words, in time, in logic, and, systemize things. And then the right brain, though, is what's putting all those details into the bigger picture and recognizing the ways that we're all connected and seeing time as expansive. And so this idea of patience, of things not feeling as urgent, not being as urgent as they feel, that's all right brain. And the right brain is largely where we work with images and creativity and uh um music and
Yeah.
visual beauty. And so that is so you were in that gathering of peace builders, you had us actually doing art. And I was like, oh my God, I don't do art. Like, I'm not a painter. Like, I do not. I was like, what? The watercolors, I do not feel. And then, but like, I did it and we did it. And I was like, this is exactly from a neuroscience perspective, this is exactly what the work is. Because the right brain is what goes offline when we start to see a conflict as intractable in an either or, a winner or a loser. That's a very left brain way to view reality. And what we need is the right brain that's looking for the third thing or the way we're all connected or this creative other possibility. And often it is through art or symbolism or imagery or not words. It's the
Yeah.
and so you were inviting us to stretch that part of us related to peace building, and I think that that is absolutely the key, and then obviously we need both, we need the integration between the 2, but, yeah.
Yeah, I loved thinking of it through the brain science too, Jenna. For some reason that it keeps your which side, your left side happy because you're thinking, but the right side gets to be activated in a way where, a lot of times we're shutting it down or not paying attention to it. So, yeah, we are thinking creatures, and we like to have a good reason why we're not thinking about it right now. So, I think it really is lovely. I really appreciate your work so much, and I love this conversation, and I wanna kinda close with the question that I like to ask all our guests, which is, that when we are in conflict and under stress, we tend to get a little grim, and we kinda lose joy, in the world around us, and so I think recovering joy or accessing joy can help us get out of those stressful moments. So I was just wondering if you could just share briefly, Jenna, where you're finding joy these days.
Oh, well, I know that a lot of people probably leap to this answer, but, I'm feeling a lot of joy in my garden, and there's this, like I have 2 twin trees that I planted at the same time a couple of years ago, and they were both the same age and the same type of tree, but one's in the front yard, one's in the backyard, and the backyard one is just thriving and living its absolute best life, and the leaves are very full and dark green, and it's spreading out. It's one of these twisty live oaks that the branches grow out as well as up, and so, like, they actually can grow out and towards the ground, like they're trying to touch the sky and the ground at the same time. I just absolutely adore them. And then the one in the front is like, just barely I mean, it's alive, but it's, like, just barely, like, the leaves are, like, fresh and new and, like, light green and just barely and I'm, like, so puzzled by why these 2 trees that are so close together are having 2 very different experiences. So I go in the front yard and I talk to that one and I ask it to tell me, like, "What do you need and what how can I help you be happier?" And I try different things and I go to the backyard. I'm like, "What do you think is happening with your sister in the front yard? Can you have any insight to it?" It's, and then I come in and I tell Austin, I give him the tree report every night, and I tell him what I discovered. He says, "This tree report sounds like an old NPR segment that would have been, like, on the radio in the '80s or whatever. Here's your nightly tree report." And I'm like, "You can unsubscribe anytime, but just tell me if you don't want any more of the tree report." So that's bringing me a lot of joy these days.
That's fun. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and last question, we'll publish the links and everything, but can you mention the name of your blog again and let us know where to find your book and your new book?
Yes, the new book is coming out soon, The Nonviolent Brain, and I'll make some announcements on my website, which is jenastdavid.com. But a very fun community is developing around my Substack, the Nonviolence Lab, and where
Excellent.
we're running experiments together. And I'm sharing about the neuroscience and the research, and then stories about people who are practicing nonviolence in creative ways.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks again, Jenna. It's
Mm.
always a delight to talk with you.
My gosh, you too. Just, yeah, so much.
Thank you for listening to Third Things First. I hope you found renewed hope that even in the midst of conflict, we can seek and find abundant life. Please visit our website, thewickedtruth.com, to join the conversation and stay up to date on the launch of the second edition ebook of The Wicked Truth coming in July. We'll be having live and virtual events so you can learn how the new edition can serve your community's search for peace with justice. Till next time, remember to always mourn the wicked. It's what good people do.